The rifle felt heavy, heavier than it had any right to be. 5 years I'd kept it clean, 5 years I'd polished the worn wood of the stock, run a soft cloth along the cold steel of the barrel. It was Thomas's Winchester, the last thing he'd ever held with his own two hands. Preserving it was like preserving a piece of him, a ghost of his warmth in a house that had become a tomb. Outside, the Nebraska wind howled a lonely song across the plains, a sound that echoed the emptiness inside my chest. It was April 17th, 1878, 5 years to the day. 5 years since the fever stole him and our unborn child from me, leaving nothing but dust and silence. I'd tried to live. Lord knows I'd tried, but it was a half-life, a shadow of an existence where the only thing that grew was the grief in my heart. On the table, a letter lay folded. My last words to a ghost. "My dearest Thomas," it said, "I'm coming to you today." I picked up the Winchester, checked the load, though I already knew it was ready. My hands, the same hands that had stitched up soldiers under cannon fire, were steady. I was a nurse during the war, you see. I knew how to end suffering, and mine had gone on long enough. I pressed the cold metal beneath my chin, closed my eyes. I pictured his face, his kind blue eyes, and whispered his name. My finger tightened on the trigger, and then a knock shattered the quiet. It was so sharp, so sudden, it nearly made me pull the trigger by accident. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. Who in God's name was out here? No one ever came to the Widow Winters homestead. "Mrs. Winters, you in there? It's Sheriff Hayes." Sheriff Hayes. A good man, a kind man, but the last person I wanted to see today. With a shuddering breath, I lowered the rifle, sliding it quickly under the table. I wiped my eyes, straightened my black dress, and forced myself to open the door. He stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking as uncomfortable as he always did when he visited. He was a tall man with a heavy mustache and kind eyes that always reminded me of someone I couldn't quite place. "Afternoon, Mrs. Winters," he said, his voice gentle. "Sheriff," I managed, my own voice rough from disuse. He shifted his weight. I thought you should know. There's an auction in town today. Foster's Mill Properties." I stared at him, my mind a blank. An auction? Why would I care about an auction? Why would that interest me? I asked, my tone flat. The sheriff looked down at his boots, clearly struggling. "Well, I know you sometimes attend these things." He trailed off, but he wasn't wrong. I did go sometimes. I went to watch other lives get dismantled, piece by piece, a bitter communion with loss. "Foster died owing a lot of people," he continued, finding his footing. "Everything's going under the hammer. Even his workers." My attention sharpened. "Workers?" "3 women," Hayes said, his voice low. "Sisters. They were indentured to him." He took a deep breath before delivering the final blow. "They're all in a family way, Margaret. All 3 of them." The words landed like stones. 3 pregnant women, being sold like cattle. For the first time in 5 years, something pierced the thick, gray numbness that surrounded my heart. A hot, sharp feeling. It might have been anger. It might have been purpose. "The auction starts in an hour," Hayes said, putting his hat back on. "Just thought you might want to know." He left and I stood frozen in the doorway. Behind me on the table lay the suicide note. The rifle was hidden beneath it. My plan, my escape. But now there was something else. I turned and looked at the photograph of Thomas in his Union Army uniform. His deep blue eyes seemed different now, not just watching me, but waiting, as if asking me what I was going to do. I didn't know, but for the first time in a long, long time, I knew I wasn't going to die today. The auction yard was a circle of hell baking under the relentless sun. Men gathered in clumps, their faces slick with sweat, their eyes ranging from bored to predatory. I stood at the back, a black silhouette against a weathered fence, a ghost among the living, the Widow Winters, a curiosity best left alone. The auctioneer, a wiry man with teeth the color of old corn, was selling off the last pieces of Foster's life. A wagon, horses, tools. each item another nail in a dead man's coffin. I watched with detached interest, the strange heat in my chest slowly building. Then the auctioneer called for the next lot. And now, gentlemen, Foster's final assets. 3 women were led onto the platform. They huddled together, their hands bound loosely with coarse rope. The eldest, maybe in her mid-20s, held her chin high, her posture rigid with a fear she was trying to hide. The middle sister kept her eyes on the ground, her shoulders hunched. The youngest couldn't have been more than 19, her face a mask of pure terror, one hand cradling her swollen belly. "The Foster workers," the auctioneer boomed. "Sarah, Ruth, and Abigail, all 3 carrying, as you can see." He gestured dismissively at their rounded stomachs. "Their indenture papers have 4 years remaining. Who'll start the bidding at $10? A low murmur rippled through the crowd. $10? The price of a decent saddle. My heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The eldest sister, Sarah, scanned the faces in the crowd with defiant eyes. And then, her gaze locked with mine. And the world stopped. Her eyes. They were a deep, vivid blue. The exact shade of the summer sky. The exact shade of my husband's eyes. It was impossible. A trick of the light. A phantom of my grief. It had to be. But the sight of them struck me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and pulling me back from the abyss I'd been ready to fall into. $10! A voice cut through the silence. Colonel Victor Blackwood stepped forward. He was a tall, imposing man, impeccably dressed, a former Confederate officer who now owned the bank and half the businesses in town. His silver hair gave him a distinguished air that did nothing to hide the cold cruelty in his eyes. At the sight of him, the 3 sisters stiffened. The fear on their faces changed. It wasn't just the fear of being sold anymore. It was the specific, sharp terror of recognition. They knew this man, and they were terrified of him. $10 from Colonel Blackwood, the auctioneer cried, relieved. Do I hear 15? Silence, thick and heavy. No one would ever bid against Blackwood. His power in this town was absolute, his retribution certain. He was going to own them. These 3 vulnerable women, carrying their unborn children, would belong to a man whose very presence made them tremble. The heat in my chest roared into a fire. Before I even knew what I was doing, my feet were moving. I stepped out from the shadows of the fence, and my voice, rusty from years of silence, rang out clear and strong. $50. Every head in the yard swiveled to face me. Whispers erupted like wildfire. The widow Winters? What was she doing? Blackwood turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he recognized me. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by something harder, colder. "Mrs. Winters?" he said, his southern accent a low drawl. "What possible use could you have for these women?" I ignored him, keeping my eyes locked on the auctioneer. $50, I repeated. A dark flush crept up Blackwood's neck. 75, he snapped. 100, I shot back without a moment's hesitation. The crowd was buzzing now. This was more than just an auction. It was a showdown. This was far, far more than 3 indentured women were worth. Blackwood stared at me, trying to puzzle out my motive, his mind working behind those cold eyes. 150, he said, his voice a low challenge. I met his gaze, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt something other than grief. I felt alive. 200. It was everything I had, every last cent I'd saved over 5 years of barely living. The coins in my small leather pouch suddenly felt like the heaviest things on earth. A tense silence fell over the yard. Blackwood stared at me, his jaw tight. I could see the battle raging within him, pride versus practicality. For a moment I thought he would keep going, just to crush me, just to prove he could. But then, with a dismissive wave of his hand, he sneered. Let the widow have them. They'll be her ruin. The auctioneer, eager to end the confrontation, brought his gavel down with a sharp crack. Sold to Mrs. Winters for $200. I walked to the platform, feeling the weight of every eye on me. I paid the auctioneer, the coins leaving my palm one by one. Then I turned to the 3 sisters. They stared back at me, their faces a mixture of hope and utter terror. I pulled a small knife from my pocket, the one I used for mending harnesses, and with 3 quick slashes, I cut the ropes from their wrists. I didn't say a word. I just turned and started walking out of the yard. As I passed Blackwood, he stepped into my path. His voice was a low growl, meant only for me. "You've made a grave mistake today, Mrs. Winters. Your husband isn't here to protect you anymore." I looked up at him, this powerful, cruel man, and I wasn't afraid. "I never needed his protection," I said quietly. "I only wanted his company." I walked away, the 3 sisters falling into step behind me. I could feel Blackwood's hatred boring into my back, a physical weight, but for the first time in a very long time, the crushing weight of my own grief felt lighter. It had been replaced by something new, something sharper, something dangerous. The walk back to the homestead was a silent ordeal under a merciless sun. I led the way, my mind racing. What had I done? I'd spent my life savings on 3 strangers. I'd made an enemy of the most powerful man in the territory. And I'd done it all because of a ghost, because of a trick of the light in a young woman's eyes. When my small farm came into view, the sturdy cabin, the weathered barn, the garden that yielded more dust than vegetables, I finally spoke. "This is it," I said, my voice startling in the quiet. "This is where you'll live and work until your indenture is complete." The sisters looked at the homestead, their expressions unreadable. Relief, apprehension, both. "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah, the eldest, said. Her voice was stronger than I expected. "I didn't buy you out of charity," I cut her off, my tone clipped and cold. I couldn't let them see the turmoil inside me. I couldn't let them see I was just as lost as they were. "I need help with the farm. You'll earn your keep." Inside, I gave them their instructions. They would sleep behind a curtained-off area. There was food in the pantry. They were not to waste it. Water was from the well. The privy was behind the barn. My words were practical, devoid of warmth. I was building a wall, brick by brick, between them and me. "Any questions?" I asked. Ruth, the middle sister, spoke hesitantly. What work will we be doing, ma'am?" "Whatever needs doing," I replied. "The garden needs tending. The barn needs mending. The cabin needs cleaning." "We can cook," offered Abigail, the youngest, her voice a soft whisper. "Good, Wareham," I said. "Rest today. Work begins at dawn." They retreated behind the curtain, their hushed whispers a strange new sound in my silent house. For 5 years, the only other heartbeats under this roof had been ghosts. Now there were 3 more. 6 if you counted the children they carried. As I prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, my eyes kept returning to the rifle, now propped in the corner. My escape. The suicide note was still on the table, hidden beneath a book. I would have to burn it later. I set out 4 plates, the first time since Thomas died. The simple act felt like a betrayal, a violation of the shrine of grief I had so carefully constructed. We ate in silence, me on one side of the table, the 3 of them huddled together on the other. They ate hungrily, their manners suggesting they had known better times. As Sarah reached for the water pitcher, her sleeve pulled back. On her wrist, a faded, ugly bruise in the shape of a man's grip. My eyes narrowed, but I said nothing. Foster, their former master, had clearly not been a gentle man. After the meal, I sat on the porch with Thomas's journal. It was my nightly ritual, but tonight his words were a blur. My mind kept replaying the auction. Blackwood's face contorted with rage. His threat. Thomas had mentioned him in his letters from the war. He'd spoken of Blackwood's tactical skill, but also of his monstrous cruelty. He'd even testified against him once in a military inquiry. I'd never told anyone in town about that. The war was a closed book most folks wanted to keep shut. But Blackwood would remember. A soft sound drifted from the cabin. Abigail was humming a gentle melody as she worked. It was a simple, sweet tune, a sound of life in a house that had been dedicated to death. It was almost more than I could bear. I went inside. The humming stopped abruptly. They looked at me, expecting a rebuke. "I'll be up at dawn," I said, my voice flat. "I expect you to be ready to work." That night I lay awake long after they had settled, listening to the soft rhythm of their breathing. Their presence felt like an invasion. a violation. And yet, as I finally drifted off to sleep, I realized something that shook me to my core. For the first time in 5 years, I was actually looking forward to the morning. The next day, I put them to work. Sarah, who told me her father had been a carpenter, I set to repairing the chicken coop. Ruth to the mountain of laundry that had piled up. Abigail to the weed-choked garden. I worked alongside Sarah on the coop, the rhythmic sound of our hammers filling the air. She was skilled, her movements sure and practiced. "How far along are you?" I asked, breaking the silence. "7 months, I think," she said. "Ruth is about 6, Abigail, 5. She gave me a searching look, those impossibly blue eyes fixed on my face. "Why did you buy us, Mrs. Winters?" "The real reason." I hammered a nail with more force than necessary. "I told you, I need help." "You outbid Colonel Blackwood," she pressed. "No one does that for simple farm hands." You looked at him like you knew him. I put down my hammer and turned to face her. The lie I'd been telling myself crumbled to dust. "I know what men like Blackwood do to women like you," I said, my voice low and fierce. "I was a nurse during the war. I've seen what happens when predators have power." Her eyes widened. "You were a Union nurse?" "Yes," I said, picking my hammer back up. The conversation was over, but it wasn't. A seed had been planted, a connection I couldn't yet understand. Later I found Ruth in the barn. She was hesitant, timid, but I could see a quiet strength in her. I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "for not separating us." "Colonel Blackwood," I said, prompting her. I had seen the look on her face at the auction. "What do you know about him?" Her face went pale. He owns bad places in town. Before Mr. Foster, I worked in one of them." Her voice dropped even lower. "Places where women don't last long." The cold anger I'd felt at the auction settled deep in my bones. I looked at the fading bruise on her cheek. "Did Foster do that to you?" She shook her head. "No, Mr. Foster. He wasn't kind, but he wasn't cruel. This was from before. From Blackwood's place. Of course. This wasn't about needing farm hands. This wasn't even just about Sarah's eyes. This was about justice. A concept I had long since forgotten. I found Abigail in the garden, kneeling by a scraggly plant, her expression one of intense concentration. "This is yarrow," she said, looking up at me startled. "My grandmother taught me. It can stop bleeding. Fight infection." Her face lit up as she spoke, a passion I hadn't seen in her before. She was a healer. She said knowing plants is knowing life's secrets. For the next hour, she gave me a tour of my own neglected garden, pointing out herbs for fever, for pain, for setting bones. She was gifted, and as she spoke, she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "It's good you have your medical books," she said, smiling. I stared at her. "What medical books?" "The ones on the high shelf," she said, pointing toward the cabin, "behind the flour barrel. My medical texts, relics from my old life." I hadn't looked at them in years. How had she seen them? That evening, a rider appeared on the horizon. My hand instinctively went to my side, searching for a weapon I wasn't wearing. It was Sheriff Hayes. The sisters retreated inside, their fear of strangers a constant painful reminder of their past. "Evening, Mrs. Winters," he said, his expression troubled. "There's talk in town about you crossing Blackwood." "People should mind their own business," I said. "Blackwood makes it his business," Hayes replied, his voice low. "He was asking questions today. About your land. About your deed." He looked genuinely concerned. He seemed particularly interested in the south section, by the creek. A flicker of unease went through me. "My papers are in order." "I'm sure they are," Hayes said. "But Blackwood has ways of complicating things." He mounted his horse, then paused. "Your husband, Lieutenant Thomas Winters, he testified against Blackwood during the war, didn't he? Something about mistreatment of prisoners?" The world tilted. Hayes knew. "Word gets around," he said grimly. "Even out here. Be careful, Margaret. This isn't just about an auction anymore. This is old business." He rode away, leaving me on the porch, the pieces of a terrifying puzzle clicking into place. Blackwood's interest wasn't random. It was personal. This was revenge. I went back inside. The three sisters were huddled by the hearth, their faces anxious. "Was that trouble?" Sarah asked. Not yet, I said, my voice hard as iron. But it's coming. I walked to the pantry, reached behind the flour barrel, and pulled down the dusty medical books Abigail had seen. I hadn't opened them in 5 years, but now as I ran my fingers over the worn leather, I felt a flicker of the woman I used to be. Not just a grieving widow, but Nurse Winters, a woman who fought death and didn't always lose. I looked at Sarah, at her strong hands and her defiant blue eyes. Tomorrow, I said, my voice ringing with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow I'm going to teach you how to shoot. That night I took out the suicide note. I read my words of surrender one last time. Then I held it to the candle flame and watched it turn to ash. The war wasn't over. A new one was just beginning. The Winchester kicked hard, the sound cracking through the crisp morning air. 50 yards away, a tin can danced off a fence post. Again, I said, handing the rifle to Sarah. 3 weeks had passed. 3 weeks in which the homestead had slowly, miraculously come back to life. And every morning, before the real work began, I taught Sarah how to use her brother's rifle. Her pregnancy made the stance awkward, but her hands were steady, her eyes focused. She fired. The bullet whizzed past the target. You're anticipating the recoil, I instructed. Breathe out, squeeze the trigger, don't pull it. She nodded, reloaded, and fired again. This time the can flew from the post. A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. Better, I acknowledged. Do you really think he'll come? She asked quietly. Blackwood. I think he's already here, I said, my eyes scanning the horizon. Sheriff Hayes had been right. Blackwood hadn't forgotten. His men had started appearing near my property line. Not openly threatening, just watching. Surveyors, they claimed to be, but their eyes were cold and their hands rested too comfortably on the pistols at their hips. They were looking for something. Something near the creek that marked my southern boundary. That afternoon the sky darkened. A spring storm was rolling in, the clouds churning like a troubled sea. I was in the smokehouse with Ruth when I saw them. 2 riders moving slowly along the creek line, methodically examining the ground. Sarah! I yelled, striding toward the cabin. Get inside! The sisters scrambled into the cabin, their faces etched with fear. It's Blackwood's men, I said, grabbing the rifle and handing it to Sarah. Then I took Thomas's old revolver from its box on the high shelf. Stay here. Lock the door. If they come to the house, you know what to do. I walked out to meet them, the wind whipping my dress around my legs. My heart was a drum against my ribs, but my steps were steady. I would not show fear on my own land. You're trespassing, I said, my voice carrying over the rising wind. One of them, a man with a neat beard and spectacles, smiled. Just doing a bit of surveying, ma'am, for Colonel Blackwood. He's interested in the water rights along this creek. The creek is on my land, I stated, and I'm not selling. There seems to be some question about the exact boundary. The other man, younger and harder, chimed in. The colonel believes the creek may actually be the boundary. It was a lie, a blatant, transparent lie. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall, cold against my skin. My deed is clear, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. And now I'd like you to leave. We're not finished, the younger one sneered. My hand slipped into my apron pocket, my fingers closing around the cold steel of the revolver. Yes, I said, my voice barely a whisper. You are. Something in my tone, something in my eyes made them pause. They exchanged a look. The older one, the smarter one, nodded slowly. We'll come back another time. I stood there soaked to the bone until they were long gone. When I got back to the cabin, the sisters were waiting, their faces pale. They're trying to steal the land, Sarah said, her jaw tight. But why? Abigail asked. It's not the best land around here. It was Ruth who answered. Her voice was so soft we almost didn't hear it over the raging storm outside. Gold, she whispered. We all turned to stare at her. When I worked for him, she said, her eyes wide with a terrible memory, I overheard things, men talking, about gold being found in a creek south of town. Blackwood was sending men to find the exact location. The world suddenly snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. Gold. On my land. In my creek. That's what this was all about. It wasn't just revenge. It was greed. A greed that would stop at nothing. The storm raged on, but a different kind of storm was brewing inside the cabin. We were trapped, outnumbered, and sitting on a secret that could get us all killed. I looked at the three sisters, their faces illuminated by the flickering lamplight. Three strangers I had saved on an impulse. But they weren't strangers anymore. And I couldn't shake the feeling that there were more secrets hiding in this room than just a vein of gold. I need to know, I said, my voice cutting through the sound of the thunder. I need to know everything, how you came to be indentured, what you know about Blackwood, who fathered your children. I paused, taking a deep breath before asking the question that had haunted me from the very beginning. And Sarah, why do you have my husband's eyes? Sarah's hand flew to a small locket she always wore around her neck. She looked at her sisters, a silent conversation passing between them. Then she took a deep breath, her gaze meeting mine across the table. Our father, she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly, was Jonathan Winters. The name hit me like a physical blow. Jonathan Winters, Thomas's father. That's not possible, I whispered. Thomas didn't have any sisters. Half-sisters, Sarah clarified, her blue eyes shining with unshed tears. Our mother was his second wife. Thomas was already grown, already in the army. I don't think he ever even knew we existed. My mind reeled. All this time, all these years of lonely grief, thinking I was the last of his line, and here they were, his blood, his family, huddled in my cabin, running from the same man who had haunted his past. It wasn't a coincidence. It was fate, cruel and twisted. They had come here looking for a brother they never met, and instead they'd found his widow on the day she decided to join him. My world had just been turned upside down, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that Blackwood wouldn't just try to steal my land now. He would try to erase a bloodline. The next morning, the world was washed clean by the storm. The four of us, no longer mistress and servants, but a family forged in secrets and fear, went down to the creek. The water ran high and muddy, but we were determined. We searched for hours, our hands raw, our backs aching. Nothing. I was starting to think Ruth had been mistaken. Then Abigail, with her quiet wisdom of the earth, pointed to a patch of rushes growing thick along the bank. Grandmother called them gold pointers, she said. They like the same soil that gold does. We dug where she pointed. My hands hit something hard, a rock caked in mud. I washed it in the creek, and as the dirt swirled away, a collective gasp went through us. Veins of brilliant yellow snaked through the gray stone. It wasn't a rumor anymore. It was real. I'm going to town, I announced, the gold-bearing rock heavy in my pocket. I need to see the deed. I need to talk to Hayes, and I need to file a mineral claim before Blackwood can make another move. I'll come with you, Sarah said. No, I said, my voice firm. You stay here. You're the only other one who can use the rifle. Protect your sisters. The ride to town was agonizingly slow. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. When I arrived, I felt the eyes of the whole town on me. The widow Winters out of her mourning clothes, a look of grim purpose on her face. Something had changed. They could all feel it. I found Hayes in his office. I told him everything. The surveyors, the gold. I knew it, he said, his face grim. The rumors were true. Margaret, this is more dangerous than you can imagine. Filing a claim will be like painting a target on your back. Blackwood will know for sure. Let him, I said. I'm not running. I went to the land office. The deed was exactly as I remembered. The creek ran clear through my property. Blackwood's claim was a complete fabrication. We had the law on our side. The law doesn't mean much when a man like Blackwood has the judge in his pocket, Hayes warned me as we walked toward the courthouse to file my claim. He stopped me before we went inside, his expression uncharacteristically nervous. Margaret, there's something I have to tell you first. Something I should have told you years ago. I tensed, bracing for more bad news. What could be worse than a private war with a powerful madman? I was about to find out. He took off his hat, running a hand through his hair. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My full name, he said, his voice quiet and heavy with the weight of a long-held secret, is James Hayes Winters. I stared at him, the name echoing in the sudden silence of my mind. Winters. It didn't make sense. Thomas was an only child, I said, my voice weak. He finally looked at me, and in his kind, troubled eyes, I saw the ghost of my husband. Half-brother, he corrected gently. Our father, he had an affair after Thomas's mother died. I was the result, the secret he hid from the world. Thomas didn't even know about me until we met by chance, serving in the same unit during the war. The ground beneath my feet seemed to fall away. The one person in this whole forsaken territory I thought I could trust. The kind, simple sheriff who had looked out for me. He was family. He was Thomas's brother, and he had never said a word. Why? I whispered, the word choked with a storm of betrayal and confusion. Why didn't you tell me? He wanted to, Hayes said, his voice thick with regret. After the war, he was going to bring me home, introduce us. He said you'd understand. Then, he was gone. And I didn't know how to approach you in your grief, a brother you never knew you had. So I stayed. I took the sheriff's job so I could watch over you, honor the promise I made to him. My head was spinning. My husband had a secret brother. He had 3 secret sisters. My entire life, the one I had built and the one I had mourned, was a lie. But as I looked at Hayes, at my brother-in-law, I saw the same resolve that was burning in my own heart. Blackwood is bringing in hired guns, he said, his voice low and urgent. This isn't about the law anymore. He's going to take that land by force. I straightened up, the shock giving way to a cold, hard clarity. Then let's file that claim, I said, my voice like flint, and let's prepare for a war. We walked into that courthouse not as a widow and a sheriff, but as the last of the Winters family, and as I signed my name to that mineral claim, I saw Blackwood across the street. He was watching us, and he was smiling. He thought he had us trapped. He thought we were just a handful of helpless women. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He was about to find out that the Winters family didn't run from a fight. That night, Hayes came to the homestead. It was a strange, surreal supper. Here we all were, the family Thomas never knew he had, gathered around his table, planning for a battle. His hidden sisters, his hidden brother, and his widow who was just now realizing she hadn't been fighting for a memory. She'd been fighting for a future. Blackwood's men are getting restless, Hayes warned. They were drinking hard last night, talking about teaching some women their place. I think they'll move soon, maybe tonight. He brought supplies, extra rifles, boxes of ammunition, barrels of water. We spent the next day turning the cabin into a fortress. We boarded up windows, created firing positions, and planned our defense. Sarah, with her steady hands and her brother's eyes, was a natural shot. Ruth, despite her fear, worked tirelessly preparing bandages. And Abigail, with her quiet knowledge, gathered herbs for wounds and pain. As dusk fell, Hayes had to leave. If I'm not in town, Blackwood will know I warned you, he said. I'll try to create a distraction, buy you some time. The storm rolled in just after dark, the thunder sounding like distant artillery. It was a sound I knew all too well. I took the first watch with Sarah. We sat in the dim light of the fire, the rifle across her lap, the revolver heavy in mine. We were just 2 women against an army of ruthless men. One of us 8 months pregnant, the other a ghost who had forgotten how to live. And then we heard it, over the sound of the dying storm, the slow, steady squelch of hooves in mud. They were here. Wake the others, I ordered, my voice a low whisper. Get them to the root cellar. Now. I peered through a crack in the window boards. 6 riders, dark shapes moving through the rain-soaked darkness, spreading out, surrounding us. Blackwood wasn't with them. He'd sent his dogs to do his dirty work. Hello, the house, a voice called out. We just want to talk. Colonel Blackwood sent a generous offer. We remained silent. A moment later, a bullet splintered the wood right next to my head. The night exploded into a symphony of chaos. Gunfire erupted from all sides. Bullets thudded into the thick log walls like angry fists. Sarah and I returned fire. We were methodical, controlled. We didn't waste a shot. A cry of pain from the darkness told me I'd found my mark. We moved from window to window, trying to give the impression that there were more of us. For a time it worked. We held them off. But they were smart, and they were getting closer. Then I saw the flicker of orange, a new terrifying light against the dark backdrop of the night. "The barn!" Sarah gasped. "They've set the barn on fire." The massive structure went up like a tinderbox, the flames leaping into the sky, casting a hellish, dancing glow over the entire homestead. It was a beacon, exposing our every position, silhouetting us against the windows. They had us trapped. A boot scraped on the back porch. The door splintered inward. A huge man lunged into the room, his pistol blazing. Sarah fired the Winchester. The blast was deafening. The man staggered, but he didn't fall. He fired back wildly. A searing pain tore through my upper arm. I ignored it, raised my revolver, and fired twice. He collapsed in a heap. "Behind you!" Sarah screamed. I whirled around. Another man was at the front window, taking aim at Sarah. I emptied my revolver. He jerked backward and disappeared. "How much ammunition is left?" I yelled, pressing a hand to my bleeding arm. "3 rounds," she cried back. "That's it. We have 3 bullets left." Outside, the remaining attackers were using the light from the burning barn to advance. They were coming for us. It was over. We had fought, but we had lost. And then a new sound cut through the roar of the fire and the crackle of gunfire. Hoof beats. Dozens of them. Coming fast from the road. My heart sank. Reinforcements. Blackwood had sent more men to finish the job. But then a voice, a commanding, familiar voice, boomed through the night. "This is Sheriff Hayes. Drop your weapons. You are surrounded." Relief, so powerful it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. Hayes. He had come back. And he wasn't alone. A posse of riders burst from the darkness, their guns flashing. The tables turned in an instant. Blackwood's men, caught completely by surprise, broke and ran. It was over in minutes. As the smoke cleared, I saw a lone figure on horseback at the edge of the property, silhouetted against the roaring flames of my burning barn. It was Blackwood. He stared across the yard at the scene of his defeat, at his dead and captured men, at me, standing in the doorway of my cabin, wounded but alive. He didn't say a word. He just stared, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Then he wheeled his horse around and vanished into the night. Hayes rushed to my side. "Margaret, are you hurt?" "Just a graze," I said, my voice shaking. "You came." "I told you," he said, his face grim in the firelight. "I made a promise to my brother." The immediate danger was over. But as I looked out into the darkness where Blackwood had disappeared, I knew this wasn't the end. A man like that doesn't accept defeat. He just regroups. He just plans a new, more terrible revenge. The war for the Winters homestead, for my family, was far from over. The next day we retreated to town. The homestead was a wreck, the barn a smoldering ruin, the cabin pockmarked with bullet holes. It wasn't safe. Not while Blackwood was still out there, a venomous snake coiled in the shadows. We holed up in the hotel waiting for Blackwood's next move. We didn't have to wait long. News came that he'd been seen boarding a train heading east, fleeing the territory. Hayes didn't buy it. "It's a trick," he said. "He's not a runner." He was right. That evening, a commotion erupted in the street below. I looked out the window. It was Blackwood. He was walking bold as brass into the sheriff's office, flanked by the corrupt Judge Parker. "He's making his legal move," I said, my blood running cold. "He's going to use the law to finish what his guns couldn't." Before we could even react, another sound filled the air. Hoofbeats. Not a small posse this time, but the disciplined, thunderous rhythm of a military column. A troop of uniformed U.S. cavalry soldiers rode into the center of town, their blue uniforms and brass buttons gleaming in the late afternoon sun. They were led by a stern-faced captain who dismounted and strode directly into the sheriff's office. "My telegram," Hayes breathed, appearing at our hotel room door. "My telegram to the territorial governor." It worked. But his face held a look of stunned surprise. "It's more than that. Come on." We rushed across the street and into the office. The scene was a tense standoff. The cavalry captain stood before Blackwood and Judge Parker, a thick file in his hand. "Colonel Blackwood," the captain said, his voice ringing with authority, "I am Captain Reynolds. I have here a federal warrant for your arrest." Judge Parker sputtered. "On what grounds? This is a local land dispute." "No, Your Honor," Captain Reynolds said, his eyes cold as steel. "This is a matter of unprosecuted war crimes." He opened the file on Hayes's desk, specifically the torture and execution of Union prisoners in 1863, a case that was mysteriously set aside after the war. He looked directly at me. A case in which the key witness was a young lieutenant who served under my command, a brave man named Thomas Winters. The air left the room. Blackwood's face went white. The ghost of my husband, the man whose memory had started this whole thing, had just reached out from the grave to deliver the final killing blow. His testimony, his words, silence for years, had finally found their voice. Blackwood looked at me, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Yes, Colonel," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "It is." The soldiers took him away. The powerful Colonel Blackwood, the man who had terrorized this territory for years, was broken, defeated by a dead man's honor and the family he never knew he had. As they led him out, I looked at the faces around me. Sarah, Ruth, Abigail, my sisters, Hayes, my brother. We had won. Against all odds, we had survived. We went back to the homestead. We rebuilt the barn stronger than before. We pulled the gold from the creek, a modest fortune that would secure our future. And then, one by one, the babies came. First Sarah's daughter, then Ruth's son, and finally Abigail's boy. 3 new lives, 3 new branches on the Winters family tree. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the sounds of crying and laughter, of life, vibrant and noisy and beautiful. Hayes, Uncle James, was a constant presence, a part of our strange, cobbled-together family. One summer evening, I was sitting on the porch, a bowl of peas in my lap, watching the sunset paint the sky. The babies were sleeping inside. The farm was quiet and peaceful. 5 years ago, on a day just like this, I had held a rifle to my chin, ready to end it all. I had thought my story was over, but I was wrong. So wrong. Grief was not the end of my story. It was just the end of a chapter. Thomas had wanted a family. He had wanted this land to be filled with children. And in the most unexpected way, his dream had come true. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a good life, a full life. This story is a reminder that even when you're standing at the very edge of the abyss, there's always a reason to take a step back. You never know what's waiting just around the corner. You never know when a simple knock on the door might change everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the incredible stories we have coming your way.